Lest you forget, I want to replay this clip of Jerry Nadler responding to Congressman Greg Steube, reading from the Bible. He actually read Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 5. A woman must not wear men's clothing, nor a man wear women's clothing, for the Lord your God detests anyone who does this. And he went on to explain about the whole gender confusion thing and how we reject God's truth at great peril to us as a nation. Here again, Jerry Nadler's response.
Mr. Steube, what any religious tradition ascribes as God's will is no concern of this Congress.
Well, it may not be the concern of this Congress under the ungodly leadership of individuals like Nancy Pelosi and Jerry Nadler, who clearly have an issue with God as they've tried to remove him from the oath, the pledge, don't want him mentioned on the floor. And as Greg was mentioning, the hissing, there's actually been a couple of other occasions where that's happened. It's very telling, leave it at that. But that's not always been the case. In fact, there have been very clear occasions in history where Congress has made known their reliance upon and dependence upon God and the fact that he has a key role to play in the government of our nation. Join me now to talk more about this, Dr. Kenyn Cureton, Vice President for Christian Resources here at the Family Research Council. Kenyn, welcome to the program.
Hey, Tony, glad to be with you.
So, Jerry Nadler's comments, God, there's no place for God in this Congress, no concern of his. That's not been the viewpoint of most of the history of this country.
No, you're exactly right, Tony. Maybe not this Congress, but you just have to go back to the very first federal Congress under the U.S. Constitution and look at the congressional record. God's will was of great concern to our founding fathers. In fact, that first federal Congress chose a former Lutheran pastor, Frederick Muhlenberg, as the Speaker of the House. In fact, you can see his portrait there in the hall before you go into the chamber. And, of course, both the House and the Senate planned the inauguration of the first president, George Washington, April 30 of that same year, 1789, took place in Federal Hall there in New York City, which was our nation's capital. And following his taking of the oath of office on the Bible, in which he inserted those words that Congressman Nadler's having trouble adding to the oath, right, so help me God, President Washington and the Congress went to the Senate chamber where Washington delivered his inaugural address, and he set the tone of submission to the will of God. And he warned, he said, the propitious smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right, which heaven itself has ordained. In other words, if we want God's blessing as a nation, we must obey his will expressed in his word. And then we also know that after that address, Washington and the Congress proceeded over to St. Paul's Chapel for a church service where the Senate chaplain, Samuel Prevost, conducted this service, which included scripture readings, prayer, and a sermon. And that was all planned by Congress, by the House and the Senate. The very next day, May 1st, Congress is back in session, and you read this in the record. Speaker Muhlenberg, that Lutheran pastor, presided over the House vote to have paid congressional chaplain to pray over their proceedings, seeking God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. Dr. William Lynn, a Presbyterian preacher there in Philadelphia, was appointed as the first chaplain. A little bit later, July 21st, the House passed the Northwest Ordinance, and Article 3 states religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. They believe religion and morality, God's will expressed in biblical principle, was essential to good government, to all the territories that would be added in an expanding nation. And then on September 24th, that same first Congress approved the Bill of Rights, which includes that First Amendment guarantee to our religious liberty. But a day after the vote, the House resolved to ask President Washington to call for a National Day of Prayer. And there was some debate, Tony. I have to be honest. You go back and read the congressional record. There was a little bit of debate. There was a congressman from South Carolina, Thomas Tucker, who said, I don't know if we need to make this thing federal. I think maybe the states ought to do this. But Elias Boudinot, whose pastor was just amazing, James Caldwell, another story for another day. But he put forward the resolution that we go ahead and ask the president to do this resolution. And it was Roger Sherman of Connecticut, signer of the Declaration, framer of the Constitution. He was there when it was done, right? He spoke up and justified this practice of doing a Thanksgiving as warranted by Holy Writ, Scripture. And he said that, this was a case in point. He took them back to 1 Kings 8 and 2 Chronicles 6. So he took them back to the Scriptures as the basis for this.
And you're just scratching the surface of the history. I mean, we're just getting started.
Yeah.
And we could keep on going because history is replete with examples of this. Dr. Kenyn Cureton, thanks so much for joining us today.